What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, April 26, 2018. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We've got a lot to talk about today. Not as much as yesterday, so we can take more phone calls today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, observations, opinions, and so forth and so on. Now, if you've been watching the corporate media all this morning, you'd think absolutely nothing was happening in the world except for the fact that Bill Cosby was found guilty on 3 counts of sexual assault, each of which carries a maximum sentence of 10 years and a fine of up to $25,000. Now, obviously, Cosby doesn't need to worry about the money, but he is an old man, and he's going to probably see some jail time unless somebody pulls some strings for him or he leaves the country. I mean, Fox News, ever since the verdict came down, they've been covering nothing else. It's just, I feel like we're being conditized. That the corporate media are just happy to have this to focus on so they don't have to report on the other things going on in the world here. All right, let's get into Syria. Russia is showing off the U.S., French, and British missiles that were intercepted. They put them all on display with signs and photographs to show where the components and parts came from. It's quite a large display here. So basically, to recap, 105 munitions, most of them Tomahawk land attack missiles, launched against targets which the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons says were not chemical weapons facilities. 22 of those 105 hit their targets. Half of them fell out of the air due to technical problems, and the rest were intercepted. Not exactly a stunning success. And looking back at the similar attack a year ago, I think the rest of the world is getting the message. America's weapons aren't all that good. And that's why more and more countries are like Turkey, want to buy the Russian systems. They're less expensive and more capable. Now, apparently, over in the United Nations Security Council, they're getting ready to sort of use this loophole in the rules to get around Russia's veto of U.S. resolutions regarding Syria. And apparently, in the United Nations General Assembly Resolution of 1950, there is a provision that allows the transference of an issue out of the Security Council and to the General Assembly so that they can have a vote which represents the opinion of the entire world rather than just the members of the Security Council. And in the General Assembly, there is apparently no veto. So over in Ukraine, President Poroshenko is calling for increasing the effectiveness of NATO and immediately reforming the UN by depriving the aggressor country of the right to veto, meaning, of course, Russia. And I note that nobody ever thought about using this loophole to bypass the U.S. vetoes of resolutions concerning Israel. Funny how it only just popped up now. Oh, we can use this against Russia here. Now, Israeli media published a photo claiming to be an Iranian airbase inside Syria to basically whip up support for an Israeli strike deep into Syria, saying, we've got to get that Iranian airbase. They're coming to get us. They're coming to get us. But smart observers took a close look at the photo and pointed out the photo actually shows Marabad International Airport in the Iranian capital city of Tehran. It's an Iranian airport, not exactly a base, but it's not in Syria, it's in Iran. And the Jerusalem Post published this photo with a caption saying it showed proof of Iranian military involvement in Syria. And they're claiming it was released to them by the Israeli Defense Forces spokesman's unit Tuesday morning. So either the IDF is lying or the Jerusalem Post is lying. But again, it's a hoax. It's another fake. Now, Trump is out there talking tough against Iran, but according to this article from uns.com, his actual political options are very, very limited right now. We're coming up on this crisis where, once again, the indications coming from President Waffle is that he is going to unilaterally pull out of the P5+1 deal unless Iran makes all kinds of concessions, which Iran is refusing to do. And U.S. officials admit Iran has so far abided by the terms of the 2015 accord. The U.S. has not. They did not rescind all of the sanctions. They only rescinded some of them and then immediately put new sanctions onto Iran. So it's the U.S. that's not acting in good faith here. But Trump wants to go on in there and strip Iran of their long-range missiles, their weapons of deterrent. And I'm sure that Iran has noticed the recent history of the United States, which will go into a country and say, you've got to give up your weapons of deterrence, and we promise we will not invade you. They got Saddam to give up his chemical weapons arsenal. He never had a nuclear arsenal. And they invade Iraq. They convinced Syria to give up their chemical weapons. They're trying to invade and conquer Syria. They got Libya to surrender its very premature infant nuclear program, and then they invaded. And I'm sure Iran is smart enough to realize that allowing your weapons of deterrence to be, politicked away just opens the gate to an eventual U.S. Invasion. And I'm sure Iran has been paying attention to all the politicians in this country who are all in favor of a war against Iran, like John McCain. Remember that video of him dancing around going, bomb, 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 Iran? He thought that was great fun. He's laughing his head off. Meanwhile, Iran is starting to fight back on the war of rhetoric. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani basically came on out and said that, Trump doesn't have any background in politics. He doesn't have any background in law. He doesn't have any background on international treaties. He's just out there, trying to thump his trump and act like the bull ape, the silverback, in charge of everything. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Iran has apparently detected and arrested a London-backed espionage operation. And apparently it was a widespread network, and they were there to basically conduct spying operations in Iran. And they also were in contact with leaders of the 2009 unrest and other anti-Iran groups. Now, Abbas Edalat was also among those arrested. He's a British-Iranian citizen and a professor of computer sciences and mathematics at Imperial College in London. And Imperial College plays a special role in training spies in different disguises to launch espionage operations inside Iran. Now, you need to remember, back in 2009, when they were trying to topple the government of Ahmadinejad, the corporate media was out there saying, oh, this is the Iranian people. They hate Ahmadinejad. And Ahmadinejad says he wants to wipe Israel off the map. All of these, of course, turned out to be complete lies. And this was another covert attempt to stir up discord and bring down the government. And they failed. And the U.S. does fail about half the time they try these operations. So that's the background on that. And so for Iran to be picking up these British spies signals that Britain is still in there mucking about. It's not exactly James Bond quality work. Meanwhile, over in Algeria, they recently arrested a network of spies operating for Israel, and it was composed of 7 Africans. And they say this proves the Mossad is attempting to undermine state security. The head of the spy ring has been sentenced to death, and the rest are going to go to prison for a very, very long time, possibly longer than Bill Cosby. Now, interesting situation. Corrupt likes corrupt, and over in Romania, their leader, like Benjamin Netanyahu, is facing corruption charges. And he was supposed to attend a hearing on those corruption charges, which he dodged by unexpectedly flying down to visit Israel, seemingly at Netanyahu's invitation. And Netanyahu, of course, is proclaiming Romania's willingness to move its embassy to Jerusalem. So maybe Romania's leader is not planning on returning to Romania anytime soon. But it does seem like all of these leaders and politicians, they are all corrupt. And I understand that's been a truism throughout history. And most societies can tolerate a small degree of corruption. But when it spins as out of control as it has here in the United States, it becomes a clear and present danger to the nation itself. And that's kind of where we are. Over at Gaza's largest hospital, the wounded keep coming in from Israel's sniper attacks on unarmed, peaceful protesters in Gaza. And they're trying to get them on in there, and they're trying to get them all out by Thursday, because they know the next day, on Friday, there's going to be a new round of wounded people coming on in. Now, a second Gazan journalist who was shot by Israel during the border protest has died of his wounds. This is Gaza photojournalist Ahmed Abu Hussein was gravely injured last Friday while documenting the March of Return. And he's now succumbed to his injuries. Now, Israel is justifying the shooting of journalists, and they've shot a lot of them, saying, well, just because they have press on their vests doesn't mean that they're really journalists. They could be terrorists. In fact, we're pretty sure they're actually terrorists trying to use the press as a cover. So they're shooting them. Once again, Israel is refusing to allow a Gaza man seriously wounded by sniper fire access to medical treatment in the West Bank. And it's necessary to save his leg from amputation. They've done this once before. And again, these are two parts of what is left of Palestine. But Israel just would rather have this guy lose his leg. This is very punitive, cruel punishment. And the world is really starting to notice. Now, the Palestinian diplomats have filed a complaint at the United Nations accusing Israel of racism. Gee, you think? They're accusing Israel of breaching an anti-racism treaty with policies that are displacing and replacing the Palestinian people. The complaint runs 350 pages. It was presented to the UN on Monday of this week. And basically, it says Israel is showing obvious bias against Palestinians through a two-tiered legal system and violating rights to freedom of movement, religion, access to resources, and housing. And the Palestinian envoy to the UN, Ibrahim Kraishi, was saying this system of racism and discrimination by the Israelis must not be recognized as a legal system. Now, I don't think the UN will do anything about it. It might even get to the Security Council. And, of course, Nikki Haley will get up there with her pom-poms and her short skirt and go, veto, veto, veto. And as if they didn't have enough problems, apparently June is going to be a critical month for the Gazans because the U.S. stopped contributing to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which has been providing food aid for the Palestinians. And without that money, they're going to run out of food supplies to take into Palestine in June. I'm hoping some charity or philanthropist will come forward and fill that gap. But again, Trump's action is another reminder of just how tightly controlled our government is by the nation of Israel. And Trump's action actually constitutes a war crime because it's collective punishment of a population which has not done anything to the United States of America. In fact, they haven't done anything. A lot of people like to draw parallels between Israel's treatments of the Palestinians and Americans' treatments of the Native Americans. And there are certain parallels, and there was a lot of cruelty done back then. And we look back on that, and we recognize now that a lot of what was done was very, very wrong. Not just immoral, but illegal, like Sand Creek would be a good example. Well, we need to recognize, and that's what this complaint to the UN is doing, that what Israel is doing in Palestine is in fact illegal. And it should be criticized. Now, the other day we were talking about how South Carolina's legislature voted through a bill that would define criticism of the government of Israel as anti-Semitism. And apparently this is part of an international campaign being run by Israel to basically criminalize all criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism. And that any advocacy for Palestinian rights be criminalized as hate speech. You know, we want to get food to the Palestinians. Oh, no, that's hate speech against Israel. And trying to deflect criticism from Israel's government by saying it's hatred of the Jews makes about as much sense as deflecting criticism of the Nazis by saying you hate the Germans, or criticism of Stalin by saying you just hate the Russian people. And it really doesn't make sense if you think about it, and yet Israel has gotten away with this in the media for 70 years, and now they're trying to get it coded into law right alongside all the laws that criminalize asking questions about the Orthodox account of the history of World War II. Now, last week at Bernard College, which has got a heavy Jewish population, the students voted in a referendum to divest from 8 companies that do business in Israel. But unfortunately, Bernard President Sion Balak has overridden the vote and said, absolutely not, we will not divest. So somebody's got his number. We're starting to see a little more tension build up in Ukraine. Kiev is threatening Russia with full-scale war if the gas transit to Europe through Ukraine stops. Now, as you know, there's a second pipeline being built that will soon bypass Ukraine and get oil and gas to Europe, which hopefully will happen soon enough to defuse the situation. But what's going on here is that as that gas transit goes through Ukraine, Ukraine takes some of that gas for their own needs, only they haven't been paying for it. And so Russia has been showing tremendous patience and just letting Ukraine get away with what amounts to theft. But now they're talking about if Ukraine does not pay the gas bill, they're going to shut off the gas pipeline. And yes, it's going to negatively impact Europe. Now, Kiev is trying to frame this as the gas transit to Europe rather than acknowledge the fact that Ukraine has been taking gas from the pipe without paying for it. But apparently Kiev is talking about major war here, and as we reported yesterday, there are indications of a major offensive in Ukraine next month. All right, let's start taking some phone calls. Peter in Los Angeles, I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Oh, thank you, Mike. Mike, I just wanted to raise something about the Israeli snipers. That this isn't an isolated incident. There's videos there of guys, the Israeli snipers, cheering as they shoot down unarmed, imprisoned people in the Gaza Strip. And there's multiple. There are different people doing it, and this has been going on for years. But I want to hark back to the only scene, Mike, that I remember out of the movie Schindler's List was a scene where the Ralph Fiennes character, playing some sadistic Nazi commandant, takes a rifle. He's sitting in his office. He takes a rifle. He walks out to his balcony, and he just picks off one of the inmates at this prison camp. And now that may or may not be true. It's unverified, but it may or may not be true. But what is true, what we do know, that it wasn't a vicious Nazi. These are the citizen army, the most moral army in the world. Multiple times we have them on film, shooting down unarmed people and then celebrating, just like Ralph Fiennes did in the Schindler's List movie.
Peter, I'm going to have to put you on hold. I'm going to have to put you on hold, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Peter in Los Angeles. And first of all, let's clear up a few misconceptions about Schindler's List. When that book was first published, it was listed as a work of fiction. And this idea that it was a true story was part of the film's marketing campaign. Second, historians looking at the actual camp where this was all supposed to take place report that the commandant's rooms were facing the outside. He didn't want to look into the camp. He wanted the nice scenery. And so he couldn't even see the enclosure from his office. That's the reality. But, you know, it's Hollywood. And Hollywood distorts history an awful lot. And unfortunately, a lot of people will come out of those movies and think they've received a history lesson, and instead they've just been propagandized. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, of course, is that unlike America's prisons like Abu Ghraib, the International Red Cross was given office space in every one of those German slave labor camps. And had a commandant done something like that, the Red Cross would have reported it and sought his removal. I mean, the Nazis did have a very strict code of discipline regarding the behavior of the people in those camps, and they kept very, very good records. They had a lot of doctors there who were trying to keep those people healthy because they were of value to the German war effort. So just randomly shooting them didn't make any sense. You know, but again, Hollywood loves to distort history.
Yeah, Michael, of course, it's artistic, quote, Zionist artistic license. But let me also make my point. There's one more thing I'd like to say. But the first point I want to make is that this is a drafty citizen army. The army is Israel. They say it all the time. And this kind of thing, this shooting down and celebrating, this is an artistic license. This really happens, and it happens all the time. And this has been going on. Great-granddaddy did it, and great-grandmommy did it too. And then grandmommy and granddaddy did it. And then mommy and daddy did it. And now brother and sister are doing it. This is a multi-generational blood sport war crime that involves the entire Israeli society.
Well, I want to challenge that. First of all, the Jewish religion literally raises people to be absolutely paranoid, convinced that the rest of the world wants to destroy them. So does the ADL sensitivity training here. But the reality is some Israelis are willing to go on out there and pull the trigger, and some are not. And of course, it's obvious the IDF is going to select those willing to pull the trigger to send down there to the firing line. So I think it's too broad a generalization to say that all of the people in Israel are willing to do this. I don't think that's true. I think there's probably a lot of Israelis who are very upset about what's going on. There have been protests against Netanyahu over this. But again, there are people in the United States who are willing to pull a trigger. And the Army recruits them and puts them on the front lines. It's the same mechanism all over. But it doesn't mean every single American is willing to go on out there and kill on command.
No, I agree with what you're saying on that, Mike, but I'm telling you, though, as a mass conscripted army going back since its inception, the odds are very much higher, and it's a little different from the American Army. It's been all volunteer for years. And yes, there's people, the refuseniks and all that. Let me point out to what you were saying about the camp and all that kind of thing. One of the things that people don't consider, or actually they've been led to not even look at, is the ultra intercepts. That, you know, we had the entire SS codes, and any military organization has to have a morning report. We have so many people present for duty, all our equipment's up, 80%'s down, whatever it might be. And this is what happened in our area of operations in the last 24 hours. That's done by every single military organization in the world. The SS commandant commanders would put that, encode that, put it into ultra. They had no reason to lie in their reports to their superiors. And there's none of this stuff about executions, nothing at all. They had no idea they were being listened to. And so that's just one more thing that helps disprove at least the official narrative of what I don't really think happened, as they said.
There are reasons to doubt. And, you know, for Israel to try and convince the governments of the world to criminalize the asking of a question tells you they've got something to hide, because of events in Germany and now Poland, they're on Poland's case, had happened as described, then they would welcome people to come in and take a look and see for themselves. But every time people look, they find that there's been this massive deception. Even the Auschwitz Museum recently changed the plaques at the front of that museum to reduce the number of estimated dead of all types of people, not just Jews, everybody. A lot of people died in those camps of typhus, down by 2.5 million, and yet that 6 million number remains unchanged. Anyway, Peter, we're going to let you go, take another commercial break. We'll be back with another phone call after these few words. I turned up the volume. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to take another phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I was just wondering if you had a couple news stories, like there's a big refinery fire in Wisconsin, at Superior, Wisconsin. They make like jet fuel, and it's pretty bad over there. Probably be down for like weeks and weeks.
Yeah, any refinery fire is going to be bad news. And I remember when I was still living in Southern California, I think high school or college, they had a big one at that refinery near Long Beach.
And then I got another story about, this was from Syrian Army, said that Russia sent some cruise missiles into Hama province against the terrorists. So that's happening. I think that started about an hour ago. But,
okay.
Yeah, so that's going on. Hey, I want to respond to Peter. Hey, Peter, if Israel really pushes it and they attack Russia, Russians will smack them down. So don't worry, because the U.S. would have to make a decision then, either start a world war with the Russians, because, you know, if Israel attacks the Russian base, which is going to be hard now because they got the S-400 there, they got the Panzer S-1s, and they got the Tor M2s there. So that place is a fortress. But if they do attack and any Russians get killed, Israelis can say goodbye to their runways, at least.
Well, I question your optimism here, because remember, there is a formal memorandum of understanding that commits the United States to assist Israel in any wars, including wars Israel may choose to start. And they're certainly, again, looking at members of Congress, our government, our president, who are obviously under the control of Israel. Yes, if Israel attacks Russia and Russia counterattacks, we will be in a global world war. Because all the people who love the war, they don't have to fight in it. They don't have to risk their children in it. They don't have to pay for it. They're at the top of that pyramid. They're playing the great game. And all of our kids and money, they're just the playing pieces, the tokens.
It's just funny how Israel thinks everybody's going to come to their... Wouldn't it be something, though, if everybody says, you did that, you're on your own, Israel? That would be the best thing ever, because then Israel would be smacked down a notch. Because they think they're high, you know, they're God's chosen one, right?
Yes.
They're all high and mighty right now. And they got to be smacked down a notch, and then maybe they won't do this crap. You know, they'll tone it down, per se, you know? But, hey, Mike, did you know who's like the world... feeds half the world now? The Russians.
Yes.
Their wheat exports feed half the world. It almost doubled, the wheat exports. So we don't feed
the reason people are buying wheat and other produce from Russia is Russia's banned GMOs.
And didn't China also ban GMOs? Also, they're on
Yes.
the process all going non-GMO too. So yeah, that's a big market.
Yes.
It's a very big market, you know. And it's just a shame that we're stuck with the Monsanto crap.
Yeah, it's not. It's more than a shame. It's a threat to our lives and health.
All right, Mike, have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Yeah, we're living in a society in which corporations are allowed to sell harmful, dangerous products, but as long as they turn a profit and share the wealth with the government through taxes and campaign contributions, they're allowed to continue with it. And I'm very concerned about these efforts to start chipping away at the First Amendment. The South Carolina bill, they want to criminalize criticism of the government of Israel. Next, it'll be criminalizing criticism of vaccines or GMO once they get started, they're just going to chip away at that First Amendment until anything that is not the official word from the party leadership or the corporate leadership will be banned. Now, everybody knows there's a major conflict on the horizon. We'd all like to avoid it, believe me. But it looks like people are starting to choose up sides here. Russia and China militaries have reached new heights together, and they are in agreement to challenge the U.S. in the Middle East. And Russia and China have pledged to strengthen their bilateral military and political ties as part of a strategic cooperation to challenge U.S. meddling in the Middle East, especially Syria and Iran. Now, Russia has already committed to coming to Iran's aid in the event of a U.S. attack, which is definitely on the to-do list, the to-be invaded and bombed list here. Even more interesting, though, India and Pakistan, whom you'd normally think of as being hostile towards each other, they've now announced they're going to have joint military drills with Russia and China. So that's the bloc that's emerging. Russia and China, India and Pakistan, and by the way, Pakistan has nuclear weapons as well, plus Iran. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Jim in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Since you're talking about Israel, last week, did you talk about that Palestinian scientist that was murdered in Indonesia?
Yeah, we did talk about that.
Yeah, because they're saying that it was probably the Mossad who did it, and they have a picture of one of the individuals, because the guy was shot down in public during the daytime, that one of the guys is from the Middle East, and they didn't say what part of the Middle East.
Oh, yeah. When the corporate media reports on any of these things, they'll never say an Israeli committed a crime. They'll just say somebody from the Middle East to try and blur that.
Right. And the other thing, did you read today where Deutsche Bank is laying off 400 American bankers?
Yes. It's actually in our talking points in the economic section.
Okay, then I'll wait and tell them. But I said to myself, is that a sign where they know something's going to happen?
I would say so. I would say so.
Well, Michael, I'm going to wait. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And it may actually tie into this story that we got here from Sputnik News, where Germany is now making noises about rapprochement with Russia. And they're saying it looks very optimistic that Germany and Russia are going to stop making stink face at each other and start getting back together, start doing trade again, despite the threat of sanctions being thrown all over the place.
Well, I think that's a good thing as far as German and the German people, because, they're so close to Russia, and they do want to trade with each other.
Absolutely. I mean, these sanctions have caused all kinds of harm all over Europe, and the European people are very, very angry about that.
Well, not only that, though, the French, they were upset because of the sanctions, because they had done business with the Russian farmers and other people in Russia for years.
Yeah. And they're just messing about with the world just to prove that they can do it.
Right. Well, Michael, I'm going to let you go. You take care.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. What's really interesting? We're seeing a government in this country and also in Europe that are moving toward more and more control over all aspects of life. But they really should have learned the lesson from the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union, especially under Stalin, tried to do exactly the same thing. And it resulted in hideous mistakes like Lysenkoism. And in the end, it was a major reason why the Kremlin was dysfunctional, because they were so busy meddling with individual people's lives. The workload was just enormous. And I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said that government governs best which governs least, although that may have also been Ben Franklin. I have to go back and reread my homework, as it were. All right, another phone call. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
But not only that, though.
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
The French.
Hold on, let me just make it slow. Yeah, I just want to ask a couple of questions. One, you said that there would be alliances, and you said Pakistan and India would be on the side of would be together. That's, I don't know about that. They've hated each other since the country split in two after the British Mandate. And the other thing is, I want to ask you about those sanctions. Why do the Europeans have to go along with sanctions? Why, since it's only the United States that put these sanctions on? Why is it that, for instance, now that a lot of these European countries can't get aluminum because the U.S. put sanctions on Russia? You know,
Well,
really
because the leaders of the EU are basically fully on board, you know, with the U.S. agenda. You keep hearing about the special relationship. You know, anytime you hear that, you know, put your hand on your wallet right away, whether it's the special relationship with Great Britain or the special relationship with Israel. Another part of it, of course, is that up until recently, most global commerce was going through this SWIFT system, which is under U.S. control. And the U.S. could go on in there and throw a few buttons and basically block financial transfers to the sanctioned countries. That's why these other countries are now coming up with their own parallel systems. BRICS has got one. Apparently the Shanghai Cooperative Organization is coming up with their own. And they're moving away from the dollar because they're realizing the dollar is used as a tool of enslavement for their countries, the same as it's used for the enslavement of the American people.
You know, that aluminum sanction, that's going to make it almost impossible to build cars in the West. I mean, you talk about, you know, cutting off your nose and spike your face. I mean, it's ridiculous. I just don't know what's going on. And again, what you told me about India and what you said about India and Pakistan, is that really true that they're going to form an alliance with Russia and China?
No, it didn't say they're forming an alliance. What it says is they're getting ready to hold joint military drills with Russia and China. But that does indicate that they are all coming together in the face of a common enemy.
Hard to imagine India and Pakistan, though. I mean, you know, even India and China have been enemies for quite a while.
Well, there's been some border skirmishes going on. You know, they're still arguing over that Kashmir region. But again, they're looking at this threat of invasion by the United States, and apparently, you know, they're willing to put down their smaller squabbles and say, we've got to take this seriously now.
How do you think? What do you think as far as Turkey goes? I mean, this guy is Erdogan is a very, to put it mildly, very mercurial, I guess you could say. He puts down Assad in one way, but in another way, he seems to be teaming up with Russia. What do you think is going on there?
I think Erdogan is keeping his options open, but he's definitely a loose cannon on deck. And I think the reason for that is that botched U.S.-backed coup d'etat attempt a few years ago. Somebody goes through something like that, they're not going to remain entirely cheerful. And I think Turkey is in Syria primarily to get the Kurds, to end this idea of an independent Kurdistan, because both Syria and Turkey understand an independent Kurdistan is going to be built out of chunks of their countries, and they don't want to give up that territory.
Another thing is, I understand that one of the reasons the oil prices are rising the way they are right now is that because they're going to muscle Iran out of the market again because with the sanctions. Is that true? And if that's the case, we in this country better start rising up and saying, no, you're not going to do this to us. You're not going to, you know, you're not only putting us in a war, you're going to destroy us economically.
They've already done both. The reason our economy is in the shape that it's in right now is 18 years of a wartime economy. And that's longer than the U.S. has been at war at any other time in history. I mean, World War II was only 6 years.
Well, Trump keeps on bragging how good the economy is under him and this and that. You keep hearing the stuff from the usual, mainstream media again about the economy being so great. So I don't know. It's Doesn't look that good to me. Let's put it like
No,
that.
it doesn't look that good to me either. I mean, we're just here on the island of Oahu. We've got 8,000 homeless people, and they're all over, despite the efforts by the police to sort of corral them into areas where the tourists can't see them. You know, you'll see them on the median and near the left turn lane trying to get some money, and it really is disgusting that we have a nation that is willing to spend $600 billion per year on the Defense Department, but nothing for the American people. The illegal immigrants and refugees are being treated better by the U.S. government than American citizens who have just, you know, fallen out the bottom of the system.
You know, all that money we waste on the so-called defense budget, I call it the police the world budget. We could have the most magnificent health system in the world. I mean, everybody could be covered. You know, we'd have just what we need, and instead it all goes for weapons and you know, military budget. That just doesn't make any sense.
No,
you know,
it doesn't. It really doesn't. And in the long run, one of the many reasons I'm opposed to a global war is I think the U.S. is going to lose it. When you look at the poor performance and high cost of America's modern weapons versus that of Russia and China, if you look at the poor morale and condition of our ground troops, the poor quality of our naval command crews, look at all those accidents they've been having. Look at the Fat Leonard corruption scandal. Apparently sexual assaults in the military shot up by 10% last year alone.
Yeah, and wait till these pilots will start running into people who really know how to handle the anti-aircraft, who really know how to handle defensive systems. Really would not know how to knock down an aircraft, and for that matter, the Russians got excellent pilots themselves, even without going to nuclear war. I mean, the Russian pilots are some of the best. And
well, unfortunately,
they're motivated.
Unfortunately, my concern is that the United States government, when they realize they cannot win a conventional war, will resort to the nuclear arsenal. Paul Craig Roberts, I think it was about a month and a half ago, came on out and said there was actual serious discussion going on in Washington, D.C. about just getting rid of Russia with an unprovoked nuclear first strike. Just wipe them out in one blow. And then America will rule the world. China would back down, so forth and so on.
As if the Russians weren't ready for something like that, prepared for something like that, and as their missiles are going to go. I don't know if you ever watched any of the Terminator movies. The whole thing is about that's what happened. That Skynet.
Yeah, hold that thought. Hold that thought, because we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back to finish your call. We got another caller waiting on the line. Stay tuned. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Mark in North Carolina, and I think we're probably all in agreement. This is probably the most dangerous time in U.S. history, not just because there's a third world war taking place, but because of the potential of utter destruction if the nuclear arsenals are resorted to by both the U.S. and Russia, which Israel would love. They'd love to see the U.S. and Russia nuke each other out of existence, or at least out of any kind of preeminence in the global society. That would leave Israel with their nuclear arsenal in charge of the Mideast oil fields, and through that oil, they would have tremendous control over the rest of the world.
Well, I kind of think Israel would go along. I don't think there'd be anything left of Israel either. If something like that happened, I don't think there'd be much left of the planet, period. But,
I'm afraid I agree with you.
I mentioned the Terminator before.
Yes.
Terminator movies.
Yes.
I think that was meant by James Cameron. You probably know more than I would about that, because I know you connected with Hollywood and all that. I think that was meant as kind of a warning. If Cameron is concerned about what's going on, even back in the 1980s, our reliance on machines for one thing, and the tension between, at that time, the United States and the Soviet Union, and now again between the United States and Russia. The amount of nuclear weapons, how computerized a lot of this stuff is, how just a mistake, like you just said, what Paul Craig Roberts said. you have people making threats like that. So let's say you're all you got to see is some kind of a blip, maybe a computer blip, and you think, oh my God, it's underway, and boom, they start launching air missiles. And this is basically what happened with the Terminator with Skynet. And do you think that's what Cameron was thinking about when he came up with the?
Well, you have to understand, in the Terminator movies, Skynet simply declares war on all human beings. And it's got nothing to do with America or Russia or anything like that. And I think Cameron's thought, at least in the original movie, he was trying to tell a story of how we allowed our weapons to get out of our control. And yesterday we had the story about experts saying that adding artificial intelligence to weapons systems is a very dangerous thing to do. Because we have the new generation of AI that's called zero AI, meaning it's all self-instructed. We don't know what's going on inside them. And you're absolutely right. We could see a Terminator-style launching of nuclear weapons.
You take some of these machines, we don't know what, like you said, we don't know what they're thinking. If they're intelligent, they might figure they're a lot more intelligent than us, and we don't serve any purpose to them. And, I know it sounds science fiction-like, but unfortunately I can see it happen. And they could use it with their own weapons.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. Anything's possible. Or it could just be a simple mistake. I mean, during the Cold War, there were a couple of near misses. And there's another movie, War Games, that was about this kid hacking into Cheyenne Mountain and almost triggering a nuclear war. That was actually based on a true event. Now, there wasn't any kid outside hacking on in, but somebody had put a training tape onto that display and control system, and nobody realized it was a training tape. And we came very close to launching our nuclear missiles at Russia. These systems are very complicated. Mistakes happen all the time. Electronics break down. Meantime between failure, all kinds of issues. Anyway, Mark, we got to let you go. We got to do station identification, and we got more calls waiting on the other side. Be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And let's take a phone call from Terry in California. Aloha, Terry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, my grandson is a combat medic in the California National Guard, and he just got activated to go to Qatar for 11 months. He just got back from a week, completed a pre-deployment testing in San Antonio, Texas, and he told me that the word was that active duty units are going to be deployed to Syria. And the active duty units are the units from the 3rd Infantry Division at Fort Hood, Texas, and from 101st Airborne in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. So I don't know if these troops are going to this new base you're talking about, but I know there was, I think you said before, there was already U.S. bases up in the Kurdish area of Iraq, Syria.
Yes.
Isn't that right?
Yes.
So it sounds like, and I often wondered when Trump came out with that statement that we're going to withdraw from Syria, but he might have known what was going to happen, and that was his way of telling the world that, hey, this is not my idea, because it all got reversed, right after that.
Yes.
So, but I'm forced to do it anyway. And the way he did it was, they were putting the pressure on him to do something about that gas attack, and he drug his feet, and he called the Russians and said, hey, this is what we're doing. We, move your troops out, or we're not going to get near them, and, don't take offense to it. And, of course, the Russians called the Syrians and got them out of the way, too, which is, what's something that Trump didn't mind happening. And so, when it went off, he knew that, he might have known that Syria didn't have any gas because the Russians, took it before it in that treaty, and he was just going to blow up some warehouses.
Yeah.
So that was his way of killing people. I don't know what you think about that.
It was all for
but
show.
it's your-
It was all for show. We're talking, hundreds of millions of dollars spent just for a publicity stunt for the U.S. government and President Trump. That's all it amounted to. And it's backflashing on him because the OPCW has confirmed there were no chemical weapons in those targets. They haven't found anything in Duma. And apparently they just had a press conference over at The Hague, and we're going to be talking about that in the next couple of stories.
Okay, but activating those troops and deploying those active duty troops, it's kind of an ominous sign, so I don't know. Anyway, I appreciate you hearing my story, and we'll talk to you later.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot for the information here. Now, it could just be a rotation, that these troops are being activated and sent over there to replace troops that have already been there, and it's time for them to come home. But if we see definite signs of an escalation and buildup, the biggest problem that Trump has right now is he cannot sell a ground war against Assad in Syria to the American people. He can't. Unless they do a really horrible false flag and dump sarin gas all over, the New York subway or something. And they'd have to do something that horrible to scare Americans out of their ability to think rationally about, does this really make any sense? Because obviously, no, Assad is not planning on a chemical weapon attack on the United States. All right, another phone call. Curtis in Nevada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Listening to what you're saying about how Pakistan and India actually, doing anything together, and how Macron, or how he reversed himself against Trump. He reasserted the globalist stance, spoke against nationalism. How Germany is going back to, in other words, it looks like the world is starting to write off the United States as a post country in the long-term sense. That's what it looks like.
Yes.
And that, I think that before the election, they assumed Hillary was going to win and the U.S. was going to be deep state North America, but the neocons wanted a position higher than maybe was what was, but Hillary lost, and now Trump is actually degraded the deep state domestic positioning power to the point now that I think the world's just going to say, you know what, these guys are going to fall anyway, maybe through the financial, or they might get sucked into a war by us and they'll lose it. And either way, we're going to be in some kind of custodianship in this country. And they're basically saying we're going to make a long-term view of this world with the United States not being a part of it, a relevant part of it.
Well, I don't think it's a case of a conscious decision. All empires have a life cycle, and the United States has been around for a lot of years, and it's showing signs of coming to a collapse. For the same reason, the Soviet Union, overspending on the military, too much central control. The signs are very much there that we are an empire in decline, and other countries are very wise and prudent to delink from the United States economically and not get dragged down when the dollar implodes. They're probably remembering the lessons of 2008 when the mortgage-backed security fraud imploded, and because of economic globalism, it almost dragged down some of the banks in Europe to destruction. In fact, there's still unconfirmed reports that the U.S. had to bail out some of those banks to keep them from going under. So it was an ugly mess, and I think probably dating back to that is when we started seeing banks in other countries rethink the tightness of the links with the Western-centric banking system. And they wanted to pull on back. They wanted to put back those safety hatches, if you will, and be able to, sever the lines and float away in their lifeboat when the U.S. Titanic hits that iceberg.
Right. Well, I think that Deep State International always had in mind for the U.S. to be taken out, but there was always that factor of the neocon, faction that would still have some kind of a position, prominent position, but I think that they're not going to go with that, and they're expecting the U.S. to go down. And what's going to happen is that if there's a martial law where where Trump fails, then the martial law will be with the blue helmets. But there might be a martial law necessary if Trump actually succeeds, because he still has to change this whole financial central banking system. He has to reset, and it's going to hurt us. But if he prevails over deep state domestic, and then if there is a martial law, that will help us to reorganize, and we'll start seeing the perp walks from all these deep state domestics that we know that there's sealed indictments for. You know, that maybe we might see a martial law that would actually benefit us. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't know if you mean martial law. I mean, martial law is pretty strict, and it's usually the last resort of a dictatorship trying to hang on to power. But if you're talking about a military coup d'etat, you know, most military people I know are strict constitutionalists, and it's very obvious this society cannot go on as it is right now. And so it may be time for a dramatic change. But again, I'm not encouraging anybody to any kind of violence. I prefer the Gandhi approach. To me, it does look like the U.S. government and economic system are very fragile, and it's not going to take much to trigger a domino effect of a collapse. Anyway, Curtis, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. Phone lines are now open, and we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Getting on back to the news. Over in Syria, American warplanes are now being jammed as they fly missions over Syria. And that prevents them from being able to tell who's a good guy or a bad guy on the battlefield. And General Raymond Thomas, head of U.S. Special Operations Command, said unspecified adversaries, meaning the Russians, were ramping up cyber attacks in the region. And he said the Air Force AC-130 gunship was aggressively targeted, which could force it to abort missions and leave ground forces exposed. Well, this is obviously Russia showing its lead in electronic countermeasures. And they're out there saying, how can they do that? You're in a country without that country's permission. You're committing an act of war. It's ridiculous to think the other side isn't going to fight back. Now, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons is bringing 17 eyewitnesses of the supposed April 7th gas attack in Duma to The Hague. And they're basically going to let them testify. One of them is going to be the young man who came forward and said they were just in their house dealing with dust and stuff from a nearby building that had blown up. And they were all told to run to the hospital, and then some people came in with cameras, poured water all over them, gave them some food, and left. So he's going to be there as well. Now, the Russian delegation to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons held a press briefing and basically saying that the doctors who were there at the hospital are saying it was dust inhalation that they were being treated for. The white helmets came on in claiming there was a chemical attack and just trying to create hysteria in the hospital. But none of the staff saw any signs of chemical poisoning, and all of the patients were released that same day. And you don't see that with a real, genuine chemical attack. All right, let's take another phone call. Don in Iowa, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yes, as far as the gas attack in Syria, my belief they're not going to be able to continue lying like this very much longer. They're going to have to at least make up some more plausible lies. Because I'll give you an example. I saw this clip on it was Fox Business. I saw a video clip of it. This guy, David Stockman, I like his commentary a lot on, he talks about, he's not a foreign policy, he's not a peacemonger or anything, but he wants to talk about the budget, the national debt a lot. So he was on there, Maria Bartiromo, whatever her name, and some other lady was there, and so they tried to triple team him, but he was saying on the tax cut, what he was saying is the tax cut was not a good idea because there were no spending cuts. And then Maria countered that, and she said, well, they had to do that. This was Trump's line. They had to do that to take care of our wonderful military. And so Stockman, who is basically he's a establishment Republican, he said, no, they don't have to do that. And then he went ahead and told her that the gas attack was a hoax. It wasn't a real gas attack. So they were flustered. They were flabbergasted. They didn't expect him to do that, you know. And they had no counter for that. So they just can't. I mean, even when a guy like Stockman, who's not trying to, he's not trying to be a revolutionary or anything, but he will state the plain fact that something like this is a hoax. And the way he put it was, no, they don't have to put more money in the military. What they have to do is quit fighting these stupid wars.
Well, I'm in agreement on that one, but what we're seeing right now come out of the corporate media, because they've been caught in another lie, and they can't back it up. There's no evidence. I think they may have initially believed the White Helmets saying there was a chemical weapons attack, and their job was to blame Assad for it. Now that it's looking like there wasn't an attack at all, there's egg all over the corporate media's and U.S. government's face. So the tactic they're using now is to just go on a smear campaign against anybody questioning the official story about Duma, saying that they're traitors, they're Russian trolls, they're Russian stooges, they're arms of Russian propaganda, and that's basically their last card. The next step will be passing a law that says, questioning the official story of the U.S. government is being criminalized. And that's going to be in there. They're trying to chip away at that First Amendment.
They're going to have a hard time doing away with the First Amendment. Maybe eventually, but I don't think that'll be a while. But the thing is, they're going to have to at least come up with some lies that are halfway believable, because apparently nothing happened there at all, and they just made up the whole story.
Well, there was a bombing. There was a bombing that destroyed a building, and that's what all these people were in the hospital for, was dust inhalation.
Right. Okay, Mike. Well, like I said, the only hope we really had was for you to get that Senate seat in Hawaii, but I guess we'll just have to hope for the best. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
All right. Thanks an awful lot here. And, if I had a large Hawaii audience, I might have actually thrown my hat in the ring. But we have no on-air affiliates here in Hawaii. And so I get to go around to the shopping mall without getting bothered for autographs and stuff. Okay. Now, apparently, Admiral Philip Davidson, U.S. Navy, who's expected nominee for U.S. Pacific Command, which means he'll be moving here, has just come on out and said that China now effectively controls the South China Sea. And he was sending written testimony to the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee, and he said China is seeking a long-term strategy to reduce the U.S. access and influence in the region. And, of course, the Admiral is claiming the U.S. must maintain its critical military assets in the area. He views China as no longer a rising power, but as a great power and peer competitor to the United States in the region. What he's doing is asking for more money and more ships. Davidson is also saying it's Beijing's clear intent to disintegrate the 70 years of U.S. alliances and partnerships in the region. What he's actually talking about is the 70 years of U.S. dominance in the region. But U.S. alliances are collapsing because the U.S. government has destroyed its own credibility with all these lies about wars. And the U.S. is turning out to be a terrible partner with all of these trade deals that force other countries to buy our more expensive, lower quality products, including GMO agriculture. Now, as you know, tomorrow is the day that Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in are expected to meet. And the signs are very good. The peninsula is one step closer to peace and possibly reunification. They're promoting communication between the two sides. They're going to allow the families separated by the Korean War all those years ago to meet. And they want to secure a permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula. They've already been talking about declaring an official end to the war. And of course, the summit is also going to lay the groundwork for Kim Jong-un's eventual meeting with Donald Trump. Now, obviously, the United States is not going to welcome these developments. Their entire justification for sticking their nose into the Korean Peninsula is the hostilities between North and South Korea. So they're not going to like this one bit. What I would love to see happen tomorrow when they come out of that meeting is the two of them to announce the Koreas are reunified, because that would end the U.S. justification for being there. Now, as you know, Kim Jong-un reported that all nuclear testing had stopped in North Korea, and it was seized on by the media as an obvious sign of capitulation to Trump's demands. As it turns out, what's really happened is that Mount Mantap, which has been used as a nuclear testing site for underground tests, has been so badly fractured by the North Korean nuclear tests, it's literally collapsed. And a lot of people are very concerned that there's going to be a release of radioactivity. No real way to stop it, unfortunately. And as a matter of fact, I have my radiation meter out here today, and it is a little elevated. But China is very concerned about that. Meanwhile, a U.S. watchdog is claiming that the nuclear test site in North Korea remains fully operational, and we demand they shut it down right now. Harumph, 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 harumph. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones here to Vivian in Canada. Aloha, Vivian. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike. You said earlier that people are accusing Israel of racism. I would actually say that it is not racism. It is anti-humanism. Mm-hmm. And the only ones who can stop the Israeli leadership are the Jews within Israel. We already have historic proof that the Zionists were not religious Jews, if they were indeed Jews at all. Even Ashkenazim is questionable. They were Bolsheviks intent upon taking control of power and resources. The thing is, they have sacrificed Jews in the past in order to accomplish their goals. Once they have managed to eliminate the threat that the Palestinians have provided, and they have worked the Jewish community up into a frenzy, they will use the Jews to kill the Palestinians. But ultimately, when the Zionist leadership has its objective accomplished, they will once again turn on any Jews who are not supportive of their goal. So it's really, I mean, Natalie Portman is to be admired. Unfortunately, yes, she didn't go far enough and condemn Israel itself. She objects to BDS when actually German Jews used global BDS against the Weimar Republic in order to bankrupt it before the Second World War.
Yes, that's true.
That's why they're so fearful, because they know that BDS works. And that's where most of the anti-Israel so-called terrorist groups started. The goal was to injure Israel economically by destroying its tourism industry. And it really irks me as a Christian from Palestine to see them acting as though they revere Christianity and are encouraging the Christian pilgrims to bring their revenue. That has always been the goal of every occupier of the Palestinian territories. But ultimately, my point in this call is to say that it is up to the Jews in Israel who, if they truly revere the principles of their religious beliefs, now is the time to stop Netanyahu and those mad dogs that are running that nation. I had no idea how bad they are. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, Vivian, I mean, there are a lot of Jews in Israel who are protesting Netanyahu right now. We reported on one of them earlier in the week. Part of the problem is the nature of the religion itself. Now, when people say Jewish, again, there's a deliberate blurring of this line between the Jewish religion and the Jewish people. And the reason for that is that modern day Jews in Israel like to claim they're the descendants of the biblical Hebrews, which has been proven many times they are not. But their religion, is inherently racist with this God's chosen people, which implies everybody else is children of a lesser God, if you will. And the slang term for non-Jews, goyim, literally translates as cattle. They don't see non-Jews as being human at all, and that's one of the reasons why they can find Israelis who are willing to go down to the border with Gaza and just shoot the Palestinians. They don't see them as real human beings on the same level.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, and ironically, I don't know if you're aware, but the three main Jewish sects, conservatism, Orthodox, and Reform, I was stunned to discover that they were actually formalized as distinct religions in the mid-1800s in Europe. Mm-hmm. So whatever preceded that formalization may be considered the ideology of the ancient Hebrews. And that itself was largely based on the entire regional spiritual belief, whether or not it was paganism in its origins, and then it was Zoroastrianism that theoretically was the first monotheistic religion. And preceding that, it may have been Buddhism. And Buddhists were actually part of the Roman Empire, and there were a lot of Buddhist missionaries in the area that had become known as Palestine under the Roman occupation. Prior to that, it was simply Canaan all the way up to the area.
Vivian, I'm sorry to interrupt. We've only got about another minute here. If memory serves me correctly, Zoroastrianism, I think, predates Buddhism. But you're right. It was monotheistic, and it does predate Abraham. And maybe that's where Abraham got it, because so much of the Old Testament was in fact copied out of other books like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Back then, there was no such thing as copyright and intellectual property. The item of value was the book itself because of the amount of labor that went into it rather than the words. And so people copied back and forth, and they altered it to suit their own theology. So it makes it very difficult to really trace where the stuff comes from.
Exactly. And West Indians, by the way, the west of India, many of them migrated up as far as Anatolia in ancient times. Mitanni was led by Indians. But anyway, I must go. I must let you go. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, we have to take a break for commercial. Thank you for the call, Vivian. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I did a little homework on the break, and my memory apparently is still intact. Zoroastrianism goes back in the history record to 500 BC, a couple of hundred years before Buddhism. But there are indications it may have existed as far as 2,000 years BCE. So it's got a long shelf life. And apparently it's still being practiced today in Iraqi Kurdistan, places like that. All right, getting on back to the political news. As you know, as part of this tit-for-tat, let's annoy Russia all we can, the Russian consulate in Seattle was shut down, and the diplomatic staff declared persona non grata and basically kicked out of the country. And the U.S. government has now entered that building, which is technically Russian property and Russian sovereign territory, and they've gone into the embassy to look for whatever they can find, or the consulate, whatever they can find. And the Russian embassy is saying this is a violation of international law, not to mention common sense diplomatic protocol. I mean, if the U.S. wants to break into a consulate, break into that Israeli consulate in New York and find out what that source of radiation is. But the spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, called the development a hostile takeover of the compound by the United States. Now, here's an article. This is from the American Conservative, and it's saying something that we have been saying for a long time, that America's foreign policy hypocrisies and double standards have hurt U.S. credibility, because I'm sure you remember all our lives we're being told that the U.S. government, we're the good guys, we support good guys, we support democracies in these countries that we insert our military in, and yet the reality is the U.S. installs these horrible dictators, such as the Shah of Iran, Nicaragua's Somoza family, Taiwan's Chiang Kai-shek, and Egypt's Hosni Mubarak. And so people around the world are coming to understand a U.S. intervention is a bad thing, and the country is going to be far worse afterwards. Remember when the U.S. Brought down Chile's Allende and replaced him with Pinochet. Another article, this is from the American Conservative, The Lies Behind America's Interventions. And this is something that all of you should probably print out. It's linked to the front of whatreallyhappened.com. Print it on out and have copies to give to people. It's time for the American people to face up to the reality that we get lied into wars of conquest. And obviously, you start with the insistence that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons, which was used to justify the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq. And the U.S. government also insisted Saddam had ties to al-Qaeda. Neither was true. Ideologically, Saddam and al-Qaeda were opposed. Al-Qaeda is theocratic in nature. Saddam's was the only secular government in the region. And let's not forget the first Iraq war that was brought out by the story of Iraqi soldiers dumping babies out of incubators in a Kuwait hospital. And the 15-year-old daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador basically lied to a set-up congressional committee and to the world to get everybody to say, oh, we have to go on in, we have to get those evil Iraqis, how dare they do that? And again, the story didn't make sense, because why would the hospital staff who are there apparently witnessing all of this, including, as claimed, this daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador, why didn't they just pick the babies back up, wrap them in blankets? Incubators haven't been around all that long, and yet babies were being born and nursed to health long before incubators were invented. So that part of the story didn't make any sense, and that was a reason to doubt it. And don't forget that was that lie about the Iraqi army poised to invade Saudi Arabia, and that was the ostensible reason for the U.S. sending troops to Kuwait to defend Saudi Arabia. And basically, they had photos that they showed us all on TV. That one blew up because there was an independent newspaper down in Florida, and I can't remember the name of it. And they hired one of these commercial Earth-orbiting satellites, imaging satellites, to take a picture of the exact same area that was being shown in the photo released by the U.S. government of all these Saudi tanks. And the photo delivered by the commercial satellite showed nothing but desert. It's lie after lie after lie. And the U.S. went on in and attacked Iraq in 1991. They destroyed the nation's irrigation, sanitation, and electricity plants, which are hardly military targets. Then they blockaded reconstruction supplies for 9 years while 500,000 children died of disease and starvation. Remember when Madeleine Albright came on out and said, well, that was worth the price. You know, those 500,000 kids, it was worth the price to put Iraq in its place. Then there was the Kosovo War that was launched with the claim that there had been a Holocaust of Kosovans by Serbs. And there were all these staged photos. There was one that made headlines around the world of this obviously emaciated Kosovan behind a barbed wire fence. And it was plastered all over the world with headlines about it's a new concentration camp, it's new horror in this. And it turned out that the photographer was the one who was inside the barbed wire fence. It was basically a storage yard. The Kosovans were there to get food handouts, and he just caught this one Kosovan looking through the wires, I guess at the groundkeeping machinery or something, and the picture was retitled. Getting on back to Iraq, Colin Powell went to the United Nations with these very blurry photos, and that's always a dead giveaway, something's being hidden from you, where he identified all these vehicles as being chemical weapons dispersal machines and decontamination vehicles. And following the war, people went to where the photos had been taken. It was ordinary firefighting equipment. Then we had the invasion on Libya on the lies that Gaddafi was planning to massacre civilians in Benghazi. And now, of course, we've got this supposed poison gas attack in Douma, Syria. And again, the story never made any sense. Why would Assad use poison gas just as Trump was saying he wanted to get out of Syria? It does make sense for the rebels to have staged a setup to get America to stay and attack Assad. And now, of course, we're finding out there probably wasn't a chemical weapon attack at all. It was just all made up by the white helmets. All right. Now, getting on to domestic politics. Over 100 retired U.S. generals are urging lawmakers to reject Haspel's CIA nomination for being intimately involved in torture. And the issue is that apparently she thought it was a really good job. So they've got these 109 retired U.S. generals and admirals who are urging Congress to reject Gina Haspel's nomination. And by the way, apparently the White House has now pulled back their nomination for the new Secretary of the VA. So that's all happening now. James Comey is still out there trying to peddle his book, and he was on CNN yesterday making the claim that there is no deep state. It doesn't exist, really. This country is running exactly the way the Constitution says it should. I'm surprised he didn't break a camera lens with his nose exploding forward that fast. Now, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted earlier today to approve a bipartisan bill to protect Special Counsel Robert Mueller from being fired from the midst of the Russian investigation. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is saying he's not going to bring it to the floor because he doesn't think Trump is going to fire Mueller. And I don't think Trump is going to fire him either, because Mueller is turning into a huge, huge embarrassment. The longer he's there in the public light thrashing around, the more obvious it becomes there never was anything to the Trump collusion situation. But the real problem here is Congress is trying to violate the separation of powers doctrine. They're trying to meddle in the affairs of the executive branch. They're not supposed to do that. It's a simple system. Congress enacts the laws. The president enforces the laws. The courts interpret the laws to make sure they are in compliance with the Constitution. That's how it's supposed to work. Now, one of the reasons that Congress has issued a new AUMF and refused to vote back their authority to declare war as it is under the Constitution is they know war is very unpopular with the American people. They're coming up on the midterms. They don't want to have a congressional vote whether to go to war or not, because their Israeli handlers, their corporate donors would say, yes, vote for war, and that could cost them their job. So they're just going to dump it on the president and say, I'm opposed to the war, really. You can vote me back into office. I'm opposed to all the wars, but golly gee, the president's got the authority now. So let's turn to Michael Cohen and what appears to be yet another episode of rummaging around the gutter to try and damage Donald Trump. And apparently Trump is very concerned about this. And Trump, he's not tweeting like a man who's got nothing to fear. He's obviously concerned that Cohen might strike a deal with prosecutors to avoid charges or prison time. Now, Cohen is saying that he's going to plead the Fifth Amendment in the Stormy Daniels case. And this is what I mean by rummaging around in the gutter. We're talking about a porn star. And supposedly, Stormy Daniels, I guess, shook down Donald Trump, threatening to go public unless she was given a payment, which was $130,000. So I think the real criminal here is Stormy Daniels for being an extortionist along with being a porn star. And we don't hear anything about that. They're going after Trump's lawyer. They're going after Trump. Stormy Daniels is free and clear of... Stormy Daniels is as free and clear as Hillary Clinton is. Okay. Just got a message from my lovely wife there are apparently some developments. Let me read this whole thing. Yeah, Ukraine is hitting up against Russia. We reported that earlier. Israel, Iran, and the U.S. are yelling at each other. Situation is escalating badly. Yeah, it is, unfortunately. It is escalating badly. But as far as this Stormy Daniels case is concerned, I don't agree with Donald Trump fooling around on his wife. It's not something I would do with Claire because I taught her to be a crack shot. But statistically, about half of all married people fool around on the side. And I think if you ask most younger males, they often have fantasies about having sex with a porn star. And I'm not excusing what Trump did. I'm saying in the greater scheme of things, it's really kind of irrelevant. And it's a measure of the desperation of the anti-Trumpers that they're even bothering with this. And I don't think they realize how the optics look in this case, that they're even doing this. Now, I am terribly disappointed in Donald Trump. We did not get the Donald Trump that we voted for. And being one of the people who worked very, very, very hard to keep Hillary out of that Oval Office and put Trump in, I am very disappointed in him. That being said, you have to draw an ethical, moral line in the handling of all of this investigation. Mueller is just way off his original charter, which was Trump-Russia collusion. And if you look at that special counsel statute, special counsels are given one very narrow, well-defined issue to investigate. They're not empowered to go on out in a fishing expedition. And that's what this is, and that's how they got to Stormy Daniels. It's a fishing expedition. But again, I think somebody needs to bring up this issue that, you know, normally when you're having affairs with people, you keep quiet about it. So how did we get to the situation of Trump being forced to pay $130,000 to Stormy Daniels? Because she extorted him. She said, I'm going to go public. I'm going to use your name to make me a little more famous unless you shut me up. And I think that should be looked at. Now, in all this talk about the Russian dossier, people tend to forget there's actually a second dossier. This one was compiled by Cody Shearer, an ex-journalist and longtime Clinton operative, and was basically handed to the State Department. And it said a lot of the same salacious and eventually discredited details as the Steele dossier. And so now, apparently, congressional investigators are starting to expand their investigation to the Department of State and how they handled all of this, along with the FBI. Now, the other day, hang on. All right. The other day, we were talking about some 19,000 documents regarding the John F. Kennedy assassination had been released and were in the National Archives. People are already poring over them. They're already finding little bits and dabs, but nothing significant. And it turns out that 520 files are going to remain fully sealed by direct order of the President of the United States, Donald Trump. And basically, Trump, in making this decision, said that these files, quote, are of such gravity that outweighs the public interest in immediate disclosure, end quote. In other words, that's the heart of the matter. These 520 files tell the truth about what happened to John F. Kennedy, which also tells us Donald Trump knows now the truth of what happened to John F. Kennedy. Maybe that's how he's being controlled, the realization they could do it to him. And based on the way he's been waffling and flip-flopping all over the place, it seems like the man, possibly because of his privileged life, does seem to lack spine. He can't stand up to his advisors, and he's not going to stand up to a threat of assassination unless he does what he's told to do. Now, Representative Nunes is out there saying that the Department of Justice is still stalling turning over the Obama documents to Congress. They're clearly trying to run out the clock, hoping for a Democratic win in the midterm elections this November. So we're going to have to get on out there and support our Republican candidates. That's the only way we'll get the truth out. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Chris in Las Vegas. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, aloha, Michael. You were speaking a little bit about the Stormy Daniels affair with Michael Cohen. And this is a situation I know very well from firsthand experience. This is not only is it extortion, it's framed the blame on the victim.
Yes.
Because she obviously conceded to have sex with somebody, perhaps, maybe not. But she certainly received a payment to keep quiet under a non-disclosure agreement and breached the terms of that contract. So she obviously is not a trustworthy, reliable, or a competent witness to be giving any evidence. When you frame the blame on the victim, the person who was extorted in this particular case, either Donald Trump or through his so-called counsel, Cohen, this is a tactic that Mossad uses habitually. This has been going on since the beginning of time, where you create the illusion that your victim is doing what you yourself are doing, but you apply the blame to them to defer and deflect from your own bad actions.
Well, that's definitely what's happening. And of course, the anti-Trumpers are perfectly willing to go along with that and try and cast Stormy Daniels as the wrong woman. But clearly the sex was consensual. So Trump doesn't have to worry about being Bill Cosby'd on this. Again, I think it is indicative of the desperation of the anti-Trumpers that they're even trying to use this as an issue. Because to me, this looks bad. In fact, I think the reaction of a lot of people is, you know, after all that money and all of Mueller's investigations, this is the best they could come up with. He had sex with a porn star. Big deal.
Isn't Congress getting the cart ahead of the proverbial horse in this matter, exonerating Mueller before they know what his culpability, liability, suitability, and criminality is in this case?
Well, they're not exonerating him. He hasn't been charged with anything, although I think Gohmert says he's got some damaging information on Mueller. What Congress, or what the committee did, is they've approved a law that would say the Trump cannot fire Robert Mueller. And it's a breach of the separation of powers doctrine. They're meddling where they don't have any business to meddle. And again, it's another sign of desperation. The deep state, which Comey says doesn't exist, and would he lie to us? Yeah, they want Trump out. Even though Trump is giving them pretty much everything that they want, for some reason they still want him out. And I think it has to do with the fact that if the scandals around the email server and the Clinton Foundation do explode into view, Trump cannot be counted on to try and tamp it down and hide it.
This seems to have some relation to this super secret special executive services, or Services group, this deep state group of administrative commission czars, who are commissars, communist czars, who are ruling from behind the scenes and having extreme exoneration from anything the Post does. He can't even remove them. That may be what this pretextual immunity from losing his retirement benefit is tied to. If he has abused his discretion egregiously and criminally, he should lose his retirement. It should be a quo levanto, removal for cause forever from all entitlement.
Yeah, well, the Washington elites never eat their own. Anyway, Chris, I got to let you go. We got to do a station break. I'll be right back after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And getting on back to the news here. Now that everybody's sick and tired of hearing about Bill Cosby, Fox News just went back on to this situation with Joy Reid, who is the host of MSNBC's AM Joy. And she basically is in trouble because a Twitter user shared screenshots of apparently anti-gay content Reid had written somewhere between 2005 and 2009 for her old blog, The Reid Report, which has now been shut down. Now, Reid did apologize in December for writing homophobic posts about former Florida Governor Charlie Crist, but this was like really bad, and she was writing things about how normal adult men cringe when they see two gay men kissing, which has an element of truth to it, and some other things as well. Well, Joy Reid decided she was going to try and evade this and came on out saying that her blog had been hacked into and the hackers had put these anti-gay statements in there. But it's starting to look like that really isn't what happened, because analysts using the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive Machine, went on back and found that these tweets had appeared in the correct timeline, and it does appear that she actually did it. And as Nixon said, it's not the crime that does you in, it's the cover-up. And so a lot of people are now out there saying that, you know, Reid should have owned up to this. But apparently she's going to continue working at MSNBC while MSNBC carries out their own internal investigation. So we'll see what's going to happen over there. The issue I have with this, of course, is I understand that when you are a media personality, anything that you do in public, which includes the internet, tangles up in the image of the media enterprise that you're working for. And you do need to be careful. You know, at the same time, even though I don't agree with her, Joy Reid has a right to her opinions on virtually any subject. So it's a complicated issue, and we'll see what's going to happen. Let's talk about the economic news now. It is being predicted, especially with disruptions in the Middle East, that the United States will be the world's top oil producer next year, and of course, that oil will be for sale only for the US dollar. Article that just came on in, this is from Government Slaves. We've been talking about the automotive market, the amazingly low prices on the new cars. For anybody who's actually got money, it's a wonderful time to buy a new car. And even the used car prices are way down. We got a real nice deal on the replacement for our stolen Honda. We're very happy with that car. But apparently, according to this article, Ford may be giving up on its U.S. car business, and GM may be following. And Ford said Wednesday it will only offer 2 new cars in North America over the coming years. The Mustang, which is a muscle car, much sought after by gearheads, and the Focus Active, which is this rugged hatchback. It's already debuted in Europe. And it's sort of like the Subaru Crosstrek or the Buick Regal Tour X. GM is moving along the same lines. They're cutting back on the number of different models of cars they're putting on out, which means the closure of the factories that make those abandoned models. And as I said, down at the bottom of the hill that we live on here, there's an old abandoned multi-screen outdoor movie theater. It used to be used for a flea market, which was kind of fun to go to. Now it's being rented out as an overflow lot for the car dealerships, because the car dealerships are under contractual obligation to accept so many cars from the manufacturers, they can't sell them. In fact, there was one Ford dealer was advertising about 2 months ago on the radio, and just before our Honda was stolen. Had we known the Honda was going to be stolen, we would have gone to this guy. But basically saying that he'd lost the lease on his overflow lot, and he had to get rid of all these cars by the end of the month. And so he was wheeling and dealing. Now, business is good over at Lockheed Martin. They're raising their 2018 forecast because war is good for the war business, and they're looking at all that strong defense funding that is coming in from Congress and the Pentagon. And so they're very happy about what's going on. And every time the U.S. uses up more weapons, Lockheed gets to sell them a few more. So business is booming, so to speak. Now, one of our callers earlier in the show mentioned this, and Germany's largest bank, Deutsche Bank, is significantly cutting U.S. jobs, U.S. rate sales, and trading. It's reducing its business in the U.S. and Asia. And as that caller said, this may be an indication that Deutsche Bank knows that something is about to happen with Asia, with the United States, with the U.S. dollar, with the yuan. Or it may be that Deutsche Bank is feeling very exposed for some of the fraud that they've been caught doing in other countries, and they want to sort of pull back in to where German law might shield them. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Over in Great Britain, they have a chain of stores called Pound World, which is kind of like, you know, our dollar stores here in the U.S. And apparently the chain is about to close a third of its stores. And that will put 1,500 people out of work. And I remember we had a dollar store down at our local mall. It went out of business. When those dollar stores can't make it, you know the economy is in serious, serious trouble. Meanwhile, a lot of people are looking at the upcoming royal wedding and saying it really is inappropriate, almost to the point of a provocation, to have such a lavish royal wedding amid such crippling poverty and despair. And a lot of the British subjects are very upset that there even still is a royal family and that they have this monarchy. Now, PetSmart, I'm sure you've seen their ads all over TV. They are on the verge of collapse. They're $8 billion in debt. And so I guess pet owners have gone back to feeding their pets scraps from the dinner table instead of all these designer balanced diet foods and whatnot. You know, you want to play? Here's an old tennis ball. I don't need to get you a special dog toy. Now, here's an interesting little story. As you know, there are these liberal strongholds, cities where the liberals have been in charge for a very, very long time, and they're basically considered bastions of democratic voting, especially in the upcoming elections. But something strange is starting to happen. Because of the increase in taxation that inevitably comes under the liberals, the increasing intrusiveness of liberal legislation, things like demands for greater gun control, greater surveillance, people are starting to leave the blue cities and move out to more rural areas, apparently in enough numbers where it may actually offset the illegal immigrants who are being brought into this country to vote Democratic in the November elections. And they're talking about how just incredibly expensive some of these cities have become because of real estate flipping and out of control housing prices. And so we're seeing a major population shift in the U.S. Now, over in Great Britain, they're getting ready to go along with Donald Trump and hit Russia with more sanctions. And to nobody's surprise, really, the EU is blocking them and saying, you can't do that. And that's because many of the member nations inside the European Union are sick and tired of the sanctions. It has caused a lot of economic damage. France especially, they were exporting a lot of their agricultural output, cheese, wine, things like that, to Russia. That market got cut off. They had a protest where they went into the local government buildings and they were just dumping all this rotted produce that they couldn't harvest and sell, just all over the steps there. And so the EU is saying enough is enough with all this sanction stuff. We need to get back to business. Our economies are weak. The only way we're going to turn that around is commerce, peace through commerce, buy and sell goods. What we have in abundance, we sell some to other countries. What they have in abundance, they sell to us. We do business. We make money. We become friends again. Now, Britain is also very angry that the European Union is blocking Britain from taking part in the European Union's Global Positioning System project. Now, we all know about GPS. We've got it on our smartphones and everything. But some years ago, analysts in other countries began to realize that being dependent on the U.S. GPS made them weak. And so a lot of other countries have now put up their own satellite navigation system. Russia's got one up. And apparently the European Union Space Agency is getting ready to launch one called Galileo. And now Britain is saying, well, that's fine. We'll just put up our own satellite navigation system. All right, turning to immigration here. Apparently, the caravan of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border is preparing to stage their mass crossing over this weekend. And the idea appears to be they're all going to rush the border, and yes, some of them are going to get stopped, but most will get through. Maybe, maybe not. And apparently the U.S. is launching what is termed as a military response to the caravan of asylum seekers. This is all taking place out in Tijuana, Mexico. And basically the word has gone on out from Trump and from Sessions. Anybody coming into the country without the appropriate paperwork will be detained and deported. And they need to send that message. They need to send that message. Now, remember about a month ago, there were reports that Mexico had actually broken up this migrant caravan. And everybody said, okay, crisis is averted. We can all go home happy. This article out of Citizens Free Press is quoting Laura Ingraham on Fox News, who in turn is quoting a high-ranking source in Mexico, saying that media networks, including CNN, working along with non-governmental organizations and U.S. pro-immigrant groups, basically worked to rebuild the migrant caravan. And apparently Laura discussed this story with Congressman Steve King. Now, I remember when I was in journalism class, I took Journalism 101. I had to have so many courses outside my declared major, which at that time was astronomy. And we were taught that the worst sin that you could do as a journalist, as anybody in the media, was influence the events in any way, one way or the other. That your job was to report what was actually happening and not influence it any way. Obviously, CNN doesn't agree with that. Okay, apparently Homeland Security is saying they're about to go nationwide with their facial passenger scans. And my concern with that is that these facial recognition systems don't seem to work all that accurately. And if you were to go through one with like serious allergies where your face was all swollen and puffy, it might not let you through. But it's making money for somebody, and Homeland Security is going to go ahead with it. And it seems like much of what Homeland Security has done since the departure of Michael Chertoff is just buy a lot of stuff, mostly from the Chertoff group. Somebody just sent in an update on Deutsche Bank. Apparently, they published an 80% loss in net income owing to a recent strategy shift. Okay, let's see, I need to see what the date on this one is. I'm getting a lot of stuff in the email right now. Yep, this one is right now. Apparently, the Russian Navy launched a missile strike against ISIS and rebels in Syria, and apparently Americans have been killed. Of course, you have to ask, what were the Americans doing with ISIS and the rebels? Russia did not notify the U.S. prior to launching these attacks, and it's not known if the Americans are regular military or contractors. The U.S. is not reacting publicly to this yet because the government does not want the American people to know its advisors were involved with ISIS. Well, that may keep this thing from blowing out of control. Boy, that's amazing. Okay, I want to talk about this psychiatrist, Peter Breggin, MD. And he has come on out with an article and testimony before courts involved in various lawsuits to basically reaffirm that psychiatric medicine is going to lead to more violence and shootings. There is a clear link there. And he tells the story about how in the early 1990s, a federal court appointed him to be the scientific expert for all of the combined product liability cases that were brought against Eli Lilly throughout the country. Sorry about that, I got the hiccups. Throughout the country concerning Prozac-induced violence, suicide, and crime. And since then, he's kind of specialized in this. He's been involved in all these cases in which judges and juries and prosecuting attorneys have determined that psychiatric drugs have caused or substantially contributed to violence. And he's got a website, and he's got a list of these cases, apparently far more than it is at ssristories.org, because they only have a few court cases where the courts ruled the drugs were responsible, but apparently there's a lot more. So he wrote this peer-reviewed article in 2004 about antidepressant-induced suicide, violence, and mania, and basically said what's going on is mania with psychosis is the extreme end of a stimulant continuum that often begins with lesser degrees of insomnia, nervousness, anxiety, hyperactivity, and irritability, and then progresses toward more severe agitation, aggression, and varying degrees. And he's saying what happens is these antidepressants accelerate that process. I keep thinking back to this one story that was at ssristories.org about a kid who attempted suicide. And they got to him in time, they intervened, he survived, and when it was all over, they said, "Why'd you do it?" And he said, "I don't know. It just popped into my head, and I couldn't stop myself." And this is an issue for me because many years ago, my doctor put me on antidepressants. I don't remember which one it was. And for 3 weeks, I was fun. I was happy. People wanted to be with me. I got invited to parties. And then the 4th week, there was a crash. And the only way I got through it, I was literally sitting on the floor in a corner saying, "It's the chemicals, it's the chemicals, it's the chemicals, it's the chemicals." I will never, ever touch one of those pills ever again. Now, down in Florida, Tucker Carlson is back. Good news for us. And he was interviewing this Florida school shooting survivor, Kyle Kashuv, rather. And apparently, he took a trip to a gun range with his father. He posted a video of himself firing a rifle, captured with a message intended to support respect for weapons, their safe handling, the constitutional right to bear arms. And apparently after that, he was called into the school office and met with a school resource officer before a sheriff's deputy showed up, and they interrogated him. Why didn't they do that with the guy who turned out to be the real shooter? I mean, this is ridiculous. They continue to punish law-abiding, safe gun owners and users for the crimes of a few crazies whose brains are melted on this medication. Now, former U.S. Congressman Joe Walsh brilliantly explained why doesn't America need an AR-15, and he posted in a tweet, "To make sure what's happening to Alfie Evans never happens here, that's why." Now, for those of you who don't know what's going on, when we come back from this commercial break, I'll explain who Alfie Evans is and why it's a contentious issue. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about former U.S. Congressman tweeted out, why doesn't America need an AR-15 to make sure what's happening to Alfie Evans never happens here? Now, what's going on with Alfie Evans, this is an infant who's being kept in a hospital. He's got a serious illness, and basically the courts in Great Britain have said he should be left there and allowed to simply pass away. Now, Alfie Evans' family wants permission to take the baby out of the hospital and take him to other countries to look for some alternative forms of treatment that might actually help him. And the Court of Appeal in Great Britain ruled against the family, saying, no, you will stay here. Our medical care is adequate, but it's not going to save your child. Now, this has been very contentious. The Twitter storms have been scathing. And as of the last word, the courts have relented and allowed the parents to take the child home to, quote, die with dignity, but apparently are still not willing to let the child seek medical care in another country. And what our former congressman is basically reminding us is the reason that the Founding Fathers gave us the Second Amendment was to resist tyranny in government. It wasn't about hunting. I mean, when the Constitution was written, when the Bill of Rights was written, hunting was an essential part of life, especially in the winter months. You would hunt to feed your family, and you would target shoot to improve your accuracy. And so the fact that people had guns was not an issue. The Second Amendment was about reserving military arms to the American people to stand as a counterforce to encroaching government tyranny. And that, of course, is why the gun grabbers are after the sporting rifles. They don't really care about the fact that crimes are mostly committed with small disposable Saturday night specials. They want those military-style rifles in order to disarm the American people, so we'll be obedient and do what we're told to do. I don't think that's going to happen. But they're pushing really, really hard for all of this. Okay, out in liberal snowflake land, apparently in the University of Utah, inside the J. Willard Marriott Library, the university has installed a white booth. And there's a sign on the door that says, "Safe place for stressed out students." It's been nicknamed the Cry Closet. I mean, are you kidding me? I thought we were over all of this nonsense, the Play-Doh and the bubble wrap and all this other stuff. When I was in college, people under stress were told, go to the gym, work out, build your muscles. Exercise is good for dealing with stress. Now they're teaching kids, go into a closet and cry. Nigel Farage even commented on this, saying the university has lost the plot. This idea of a closet to lock yourself in when you're feeling too stressed out. I mean, it really is ridiculous. Now, the millennial snowflakes now have somebody to blame for the fact that their lives are not going the way they thought they should be going. They're not blaming government. They're not blaming the war economy. They're not blaming Wall Street. It's all the fault of the baby boomers. It's all you old people. You're to blame for the country being worse off. And I do resent that because I've spent a third of my life now trying to make this a better place for the future generation. And I will grant you I have not succeeded. But to say that I intentionally made things worse for the future generations, that really is insulting. And a lot of the millennial snowflakes are in the condition they're in because of choices they themselves made and refused to take responsibility for. Like their majors in university. They go into for liberal arts and art history majors and all kinds of stuff that doesn't really lead to employment. So they get out of school, they can't find a high-paying job, they're stuck with the student loans. Oh, it's all the fault of the baby boomers. No, it's the fault of greedy banks who are out there trying to get you plunged on that debt hook. And if you're going to spend that money to go to a university, learn something that will get you a high-paying job. Learn engineering or computer sciences or math or construction or manufacturing. We're very short of people who know how to manufacture. Don't just sit there and say, it's all your fault. Most of the people of my generation, we did our best to build a better world. But it's been deteriorated over the last 30 years by a government that thinks war on other countries is more important than taking care of the country that we did build. What our generation built is all rotting away. You know, my generation put men on the moon, landers on Mars. We built all these amazing things, and they've all just been thrown away, allowed to rot and corrode in the rush to war. The reason life is much worse for younger people today is because of that constant state of war. And they need to face up to that. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And a little alarming article coming out of Nellert Blogspot, basically asking if California is going on the attack against homeschooling. And we know there's a bit of a war going on between the homeschoolers and the government. The homeschoolers want their kids to get a decent education, which is not happening in the public school system. They're getting indoctrination. They're being told what to believe, to be obedient to authority. They're not learning basic skills. And so parents more and more are turning to homeschooling to teach their kids basics. You know, how to read, how to write, how to do math. And government, of course, wants all the students in the school in order to go on promoting government propaganda. Human caused global warming is real. The Second Amendment only applies to government-controlled militias, and so forth and so on. So it looks like there's an attempt to modify the education code in California, which would require homeschooling parents to basically go through the same process that a regular public school goes through to get permission to teach. And that, of course, is a burden parents, very few parents would be able to afford that, either in time or costs. And so it's another attack on the rights of parents to basically have any say about their children. But again, going back to Hillary Clinton's book, It Takes a Village, the attitude of the liberals is, actually, we own your children. Thank you very much for giving them birth and for raising them and feeding them and housing them, but they really belong to the state. And so we will teach them, we will vaccinate them, we will tell them what to eat, and you have no say about that. We were talking yesterday about some of the sex education materials being given to California school children have really upset the parents. And again, what kind of a job do they think they're preparing these kids for with this kind of stuff? I mean, when I was in high school, you know, education was, I mean, there was, you know, athletics. You all had to take part in athletics, build up your bodies and everything. Classes in algebra, physics, things like that. There was shop class, machine shop class, auto shop class, things that taught basic skills that you could get a job with, that you could build a country with. Don't seem to see that much anymore. I keep thinking about that story yesterday where this university has basically shut down a 100-year-old outdoor recreation club because the outdoors is too dangerous. Really, you can't go out there. Go into this little cry closet and have your tantrum, and that will be it. It's weird. Somebody pointed out a very interesting double standard. Apparently, a judge ruled in favor of a bar that had ordered Trump supporters to leave the premises. And the Trump supporters had basically sued, and the judge agreed with the owner of the bar that, in point of fact, he had the right to refuse service to anybody. And it prompted a lot of people to say, what's going on here? Because we have, on one hand, the courts saying that the bar can boot the Trump supporters, but a bakery cannot deny gay customers. And it's another reminder that there doesn't seem to be any continuity in our legal system. It's all basically ad hoc determination. You know, we're against Trump, so the bar can kick him out. You know, we support the gays, so the bakers have to make them a cake. This is all very destabilizing to our society. And I don't know if that is really what is intended here, but it is very obvious hypocrisy and double standard. Now, California passed a law a while ago. In fact, it was November 2014, Proposition 47. And this was a law that was aimed at reducing charges for crimes that had been felonies to misdemeanors for drug and property crimes, including theft. Now, the stated goal of Proposition 47 was to reduce the state's prison population and emphasize rehabilitation, and to help drug addicts keep a felony off their record for what lawmakers now view as minor crimes. And to nobody's surprise, crime has exploded, because now criminals feel they can go on out and commit the crimes and not risk felony time. It's a misdemeanor. And so as long as the theft does not exceed $950 in value, it will be charged as a misdemeanor, no matter how many prior offenses the suspect has on their record. Shoplifting, receiving stolen property, writing bad checks, check forgery, and other thefts like car break-ins are now deemed a misdemeanor if under the $950 mark. Well, certainly our Honda would have qualified for that one. It's another example of people not really thinking what's going to happen when they pass these laws, because they're caught up in that liberal fantasy. We're going to make this law, and they don't understand human nature is going to turn these laws on their head. They open the borders, they think everything's going to be well, we get illegal immigrants, skyrocketing crime. They decrease crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. I wonder how many career criminals actually lobbied for and supported that law. And you get more crime. And sometimes it gets a little bit silly. This guy should have gotten a misdemeanor instead. Guy named Eric Lundgren, and he's basically, he's an environmentalist. And what he does environmentally is he recycles computers so that they don't become e-waste, because there's a lot of toxic things inside those electronics, which if dumped in a landfill will leach out into the groundwater, and you don't want it there. And apparently one of the things he was doing was recovering what are called the restore CDs, which are the disks that reinstall Microsoft Windows operating system after a failure. And for some reason, he got charged for this, and he's been sentenced to a 15-month stay in federal prison over these restore CDs. Now, the CDs do not represent a pirated copy of the operating system, because the assumption is that when he sells these restore CDs, the person buying it has a valid current Windows license. There is no licensing information on the disk. And here's the kicker. You can download these restore CDs for free from Microsoft. What a huge waste of time and money this case was. It really is ridiculous. Now, there's a little bit of good news coming from the world of computers. The world's biggest distributed denial of service for hire group has been shut down. And this was done by Europol. And they're saying that webstressor.org, that was the name of this organization, had 136,000 registered users and 4 million attacks detected by the first of this month, targeting online services from banks, government institutions, police forces, and the gaming world. 136,000 users were paying this website to launch denial of service attacks against targeted machines. I think all of those 136,000 registered users need to be prosecuted. They're just as guilty as the owners of the botnet. But I'm glad they've shut them down. Won't be the last one, however. Apparently there is a market out there for this kind of civilian cyber war, if you will. Over in India, Monsanto has been dealt a setback regarding their desire to patent seeds. And apparently this runs afoul of an Indian law, the Indian Patent Act, which states that seeds and life forms cannot be patented. And the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act, which biotech multinationals have tried to undermine, saying that key plant genetic material cannot be patented. Now, the court is saying that Monsanto has a right to collect royalties on their particular version of seeds, but the GMO technology in them has to be made available for others to research and learn from. Now, a lot of people have been caught up in this Black Lives Matter situation, this destruction of Confederate symbols because of the link to slavery. And it's their cause. It's their cause. So it's rather interesting to see the reaction to a little bit of actual history. This is from dublinsmcwordpress.com, and it talks about the fact that the first slaves in the United States were not black, they were Irish. They weren't indentured servants. They were literally sold into slavery for unpaid debts. They were sent across the ocean, literally in the holds of overcrowded ships. A lot of them died. Those who survived the journey were bought and sold in chains to work as hard as their owners chose. Some of these Irish went to the Caribbean, to the American colonies. Does it sound familiar? Yeah, it does. Slavery is slavery, regardless of who's being enslaved. Now, this history of the Irish slaves has been suppressed. A lot of people don't know about it. And what we're hearing from Black Lives Matter and other people is that the Irish slaves shouldn't be talked about because it detracts from the black experience. It takes away from the black experience. You should only be upset about our slavery. Forget about the Irish slavery. They don't count. You know, Black Lives Matter, remember? We seem to be short of common sense in this day and age. Everybody's just out there screaming about whatever they want and throwing a tantrum if they don't get it. Now, story coming out of Investment Watch blog talking about climate pattern shift in Europe with vineyard and grain crop losses. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday, how the very harsh and lingering winter is cutting into the growing season, both here in the United States and in Europe, which may lead to some food shortages. And now on top of that, they're saying that because of the damage to the vineyards, there may actually be a shortage of European wines, which for people who are into wine means higher prices. And the carbon Nazis are still out there saying, oh, human-caused global warming, human-caused global warming. It's out there. It's still snowing in some places. Israel got hit with some weird weather. Massive, massive rainstorm. Almost as bad as the one that hit Kauai. Apparently 9 people literally were drowned in a flash flood. Now, the other day we were talking about these Italian scientists, and I know I mentioned this before, but it's worth repeating. These Italian scientists had studied 44 of the most common vaccines used around the world and discovered they were contaminated with nanoparticles of materials known to have neurological side effects. And they got interviewed on TV, they published, and now their homes have been raided, and the documentation of their findings has been confiscated. So once again, we're in this situation of we've got to protect the corporation. We've got to protect the money. We've got to protect the profits. And it really is very alarming to see just how far down that fascist road the world has gone. Because that's what fascism is. The teaming up of corporate interests and government power against the general population. We have the machinery of government protecting corporate interests, even to the point of attacking scientists who question the orthodox view of medicine and the safety of vaccines. So it's really intense. And you have to worry when you talk about the next generation. What are they going to grow up with? Mandatory vaccines that are more harmful than beneficial because it makes money. GMO food that causes cancer because it makes money. Toxic chemicals in their household and cosmetic products because it makes money. I keep thinking back to what we went through with Claire with her joint pain all those years ago. And we went to the doctors and they gave her off-label medication and creams and ointments and special shoes and all the rest of it for 5 long years until we finally figured out for ourselves the problem was a class of chemicals called formaldehyde precursors in the low-end cosmetic and household products. And when I discovered that her symptoms matched exposure to these chemicals, I remember going on in and just saying, I just want to try an experiment for 1 week. We're not going to use any of these products. We didn't even have to wait a week. The very next day, the pain was gone. And we tried to communicate that back to the doctors. They weren't interested. They weren't interested at all. They're all about selling product. They're all about getting more money from you. They want a bigger, shinier sports car than the doctor in the office next door. I actually had a doctor who confided in me that when hospitals rate the physicians in their employ, they don't rate them for the quality of care. They basically look at how much revenue is being generated by the doctors. And the doctor who generates the most revenue, they get to stay. The doctors who are generating the least revenue, they're asked to leave. It really is a messed up system, and that's why I call it the medical industrial complex. Okay, we're going to take a phone call. Kevin in Connecticut, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Fine.
First-time caller, long-time listener, and I just wanted to comment on something I heard the other day. I'm not listening to the show on the internet right now, so I'm not really sure if this is on topic or not.
Okay.
But when you were talking about the Security Council and the permanent members and the rotating in and out members, and how it basically the Security Council basically rules the United Nations, and the whole General Assembly thing and everything is basically just a dog and pony show. And you had mentioned that it would be a good thing that maybe if they shut the whole thing down. And that's why I wanted to comment, because I don't know the last time that you were in New York, but obviously being from Connecticut, I live, only 2 hours from Manhattan.
Okay, Kevin, I'm going to have to put you on hold. Okay, hold that place in your thought train, and we'll be back to you after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Last segment of our program on this Thursday. We're talking with Kevin in Connecticut. And the last time I was in New York was for the 10th anniversary of 9/11. I got invited to speak at a symposium there, which was a bit of a thrill, because how many peace activists get to perform off Broadway? And while Claire and I were there, we did play tourist a little tiny bit, and we did stand outside the UN building. So that was the last time I saw that.
Yeah, I was rambling a little there before the break, but what I wanted to say was the countries that have permanent missions in New York City, which basically ends up being a 70-story palace in Midtown Manhattan, they will never give that up. And especially with some of the countries that most of their citizenry is in destitute poverty while they live high on the hog as diplomats in one of the most expensive places on earth, with servants and everything at their feet. There's no way that those countries will ever give up the United Nations, even though they basically don't do it.
You need to look at your history. There have been organizations like the UN before, the OAS, for example, the League of Nations. They perform basically the same function. They have the same perks and lavish lifestyle, and the people who worked for these organizations certainly didn't want them to go away, but they reached a point of corruption where they simply collapsed. And I think a lot of people are saying that we don't need the United Nations. It's not really doing anything. It certainly can't rein in its problem child, Israel. And what use is it at this point? I mean, yes, they do some charitable work around the world, but it costs an awful lot to support the UN. They're living on very expensive real estate, and I think they could collapse. And I really do think we need to have something better in its place.
I agree, Mike, and I'll let you go. I really appreciate all you do for our country and for the world. Thanks.
All right, well, thank you very much for those kind words. And last story of the day, talk about military waste here. Apparently, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, those are the blue sky people, the ones who are just out there on the cutting edge. They awarded a contract to Aurora Flight Sciences in 2016 to build an unmanned vertical takeoff and landing X-plane as part of the program known as Lightning Strike. And they've spent $89.4 million on this, and they just canceled the program. Apparently, it wasn't working out. Now, I have to wonder, what good would $89.4 million do for, say, a city school system? I mean, we look at the waste that's going on in defense. We know they've lost something like $8 trillion. I don't even know if that's part of the $20 trillion that the federal government misplaced. Probably it's a lot worse if it isn't. But it's just this vast amount of money taken from the American people and spent on all of this nonsense. Anyway, there's the music. Time for me to leave. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. And we'll be back tomorrow with the lovely Lady Claire. So aloha, America.